All right, well, it's Friday, so somebody must be clout chasing Errol Spence Jr. And this time, it is Keith Thurman, so you know I love it. Dog, eventually we got to come around to getting down with this fight right here. But he has something to say about Errol Spence not being able to take the punches from Danny Garcia. Let's talk about that in this video. So Keith Thurman says, Errol, stop it, man. Porter can't punch. Danny Garcia got them Philly bricks, and you ain't going to be able to fight him like you did Sean Porter. Keith Thurman, so what? He beat Sean Porter, and he's about to beat Danny Garcia, okay? Guess what? You can't punch like Danny Garcia. Well, can you? No, Keith, you can't punch like Danny Garcia, and you still beat Danny Garcia. What would prevent Errol Spence Jr. from just fighting a way different than he fought Sean Porter? But let's get into it first, man. I got to say this. I really want the Errol Spence Jr. Keith Thurman fight. I do. It's a guilty pleasure of mine. I am going to be doing Keith Thurman videos. I've been doing them if you've not checked them out on a regular basis because I think Keith Thurman is definitely one of the best fighters at welterweight. He just made a mistake, okay? He thought that he had crossed the finish line, but he had not crossed the finish line. And that's a reasonable thing, right? There was Manny Pacquiao and Floyd Mayweather Jr., and they were the top of the welterweight division. They were the top of the boxing world. They were on top of the sporting world. And Keith Thurman was a welterweight, young welterweight one time, had his braids in, looking mean, knocking people out on the way up, talking good-ish, right? All of that. Then Floyd, but never was able to get that Manny Pacquiao fight. Was never able to get the Floyd Mayweather Jr. fight. So he was left atop the welterweight division, but yet had never really became the superstar that he could have been if he would have been able to beat or get the fight with Floyd Mayweather Jr. or Manny Pacquiao when he was healthy, by the way. I know you guys are going to come back and say, well, Manny eventually beat him. Dog, Manny beat him after that dude was out 2 years, right? Out 2 years, had one tune-up fight, and Manny Pacquiao jumped right in there with him. At the time, who knows how that would have played out. But we don't need to worry about it because it didn't play out. And Keith Thurman then, not being the superstar that he could have been if he gotten the shot, wound up sitting at the top of 147, being the target for everybody else, okay? And since he was the target for everybody else, because he was the only welterweight that really had made any, he was the only one that had made any real leeway into, gaining some degree of popularity, right? With his fights on, on Showtime. But, he just wasn't a man. But he had to, he went and fought, he fought his contemporaries, but he would not fight Errol Spence Jr. Now, Errol Spence Jr. did not have the same constraints that Keith Thurman had. Errol Spence Jr. came up, and Floyd Mayweather and Manny Pacquiao were already off the scene when he started coming up. So he's building himself off of his name. He's not being compared to Floyd Mayweather Jr. And in fact, he actually gets a really good reputation relative to Floyd Mayweather Jr. because he beats him up. I don't know. I didn't see the sparring match, but it was said that he gave Floyd Mayweather Jr. tremendous work. And obviously that was the truth because he's still giving world champions tremendous work right now. But let's actually analyze what Keith Thurman says. I think it's just, look, man, Keith is going to try to keep himself relevant because he still is the guy that can get fights with Danny, Danny, with Sean, with Errol, with Terrence Crawford, with Manny Pacquiao. He's still one of those guys. So I'm hoping he actually gets the Errol Spence Jr. fight because I want that whole thing that was going on many years ago to come all the way to fruition. And we can see whether or not Keith Thurman has the ability to handle Errol Spence Jr. But right now, the fight that we have between Errol and Keith is the fight. The fight that we have for Errol now is the Danny Garcia fight. So let's examine or talk about what Keith Thurman had to say. Well, if his point is that the way that Errol Spence Jr. fought Sean Porter, which was he exchanged, and he said, he was exchanging punches. He didn't exchange punches like stick your chin out and hit me with anything, but because he was on the inside trying to make it work, and he was fighting a guy that was shorter than him and had shorter arms than him, hey, man, it was a good fight on the inside, but Errol Spence Jr. most definitely, got the best of that fight. However, why would you assume that Danny Garcia is going to be able to fight the same fight on the inside that Sean Porter was able to fight on the inside, right? Because, like, say, for example, or actually people say this a lot, like a really good puncher, how do you take the steam off of their punches? You smother their punches. It's harder to gain anything when a guy's up in your chest to really light anything off versus where, he's out and you can catch him at the end of the punches, right? For example, when Danny Garcia knocked out Brandon Rios, right? Which honestly, man, was a halfway decent fight until the ultimate until he got knocked out. Till Brandon Rios got knocked out. But Brandon Rios left that, he left that weak jab out there. He left his weak jab, let that jab hang out there too long. And that's when Danny Garcia came through like, yeah. Dog, Errol Spence Jr. ain't leaving his jab out there like that. You know what I'm saying? Errol Spence Jr. ain't Amir Khan. He ain't Lucas Matisse. Lucas Matisse didn't get knocked out. He ain't Lamont Peterson. There are guys that fought that way against Danny Garcia and did perfectly fine. Lamont Peterson. Most people thought Lamont Peterson beat Danny Garcia. So now I don't know about that. I don't know if Danny Garcia, I don't think that it is really a threat to Errol Spence. If Errol Spence is just in shape and it's no issues with that car accident, I don't see a problem with Errol Spence Jr. getting on the inside with Danny Garcia. Now, if he gets caught on the way in or gets caught on the way out, that's something else. But if he's up in his chest, what's Danny Garcia really going to do? He's not going to hit him with a no-look left hook when the guy's in his chest, right? He's hitting those guys with the no-look left hook out here, not up in here. So I don't see it. And as far as the punching power for Danny Garcia, I do believe that Danny Garcia has more punching power than Sean Porter. I also believe that he has as much punching power as Keith Thurman. Dude, Keith Thurman, but that's kind of like, okay. Neither one of them are knocking out Deontay. Neither one of them are knocking out Errol Spence Jr. You see what I'm saying? So it just doesn't really, I don't think that Errol Spence Jr. is going to, when he fights Danny Garcia, I don't think he's going to have any problems if he's on the outside or if he's on the inside. If he's cutting off the ring, getting on the inside, and he's working that body, and he's working the body, going down low to come up on top, landing the jab, especially that move that he really likes, that jab. He likes the right jab to the body and then the left and the straight left up top. Just absolutely little beautiful two-punch combination that'll keep him out of that mid-range, in my opinion. So Danny Garcia's chance in this fight is that Errol Spence Jr. is damaged. And I think that is pretty much the only real chance Danny Garcia has of winning the fight. Because Keith Thurman is right in this regard. He's right that if Errol Spence Jr. just stands up there and takes shots willy-nilly from Danny Garcia, he can definitely get knocked out. But anybody can get knocked out if you just stand and throw your chin out there and get hit with a left hook like that. The likelihood of that happening, though, is not that big because Errol is as good a boxer as Danny Garcia is, but he can also just win the fight on the outside. Anytime that he feels like there's any issues, he can outbox Danny from the outside. And in fact, if you look at the Lamont Peterson fight for Danny Garcia, and you look at like the two different ways that Lamont Peterson fought Danny Garcia in that fight, I think he beat him both ways. He beat him when he was aggressive coming forward and taking the fight to Danny. And I think he beat him when he was fighting from the outside, when he just boxed him on the outside. Like Mauricio Herrera was beating him on the outside, right? Like Sean Porter beat him by fighting on the outside. Like Keith Thurman fought by fighting him on the outside. Errol is as good from fighting on the back foot on the outside as any of those guys are. And you saw that with the Mikey Garcia fight. So he can switch between the two. He can go get on the inside. The real danger zone for him, though, is it's in that in between. And if he is slipping up, yeah, he can get caught with one. But if you looked at the way Derrick James has prepared Jermell Charlo for Jason Rosario, and you look at how these training camps are going for Errol Spence, you better believe that they got a game plan for Danny Garcia that is going to take advantage of both of those things. But Keith Thurman, we hope to see you next. That's what I want to see. I want to see Keith Thurman, not next, after the Terrence Crawford fight. But I do think everybody else should fight Keith Thurman. And I'm loving the fact that he's back in the sport. And with that, that's my opinion. You let me know what you think. And with that, I'm out. Peace.